Sarah Bartel interviewing a colleague to help better inform you about the issues vouchers has. So please introduce yourself and we'll take it from there.
Hi, I'm Allison Wagner. I'm a senior English education student here at UW-Eau Claire. I didn't personally go to a voucher school, but this was a topic that I did a lot of research on when I was in ES 385 with Dr. Torres.
So what are what do you think the main issues of vouchers are?
So I think it's a pretty multifaceted issue. It's very understandable that parents want the best schools for their students as soon as possible. And I think that that's where a lot of the support for vouchers comes from. But what you have to understand is when money goes towards voucher schools, it's taking money away from our already failing public schools. So for every student who had a great experience in a private voucher school, it's making the experience lesser for a student in a public school. And often the students who remain in the public schools, who have no opportunity to go off to the to voucher schools, are the ones who need the most help. So I think there are several really big issues with the voucher program. One of them being, of course, that it takes funding away from the public schools. There's also a lot of social issues involved when you start sending kids to voucher schools. For example, it leads to a lot of school segregation, honestly, because when you have the opportunity for parents to send their kids wherever they want, this isn't the first thing you think of, but a lot of students who are like white get sent off to the voucher schools, and students of color, minority students, are left at public schools. And actually, in the 50s and 60s, when voucher schools became very popular, that was the purpose of voucher schools, was to segregate education without doing it by law. So although that's not, of course, the main purpose today, that effect still exists. Also, a big reason that that parents want to send their kids to voucher schools is to do academically better. But the 2011 WKCE results show that students at voucher schools actually scored lower than students in the Milwaukee public school system, including those who are identified as economically disadvantaged. So there's really no research proving that these voucher schools are doing better for students than public schools. Like there's no it seems better to send your kids off to these schools who say they're going to do better for your kids, but it's really not proven to be working that way. Also, private schools don't have to follow the same regulations as public schools. So private schools do not have to, by law, provide the same opportunities for students with disabilities than public schools do. So you actually see voucher schools turning away a lot of students with disabilities because they're simply not required to provide those services, which is inherently unequal. In fact, Article 10 of the Wisconsin Constitution says that the state must provide by law the establishment of district schools, which shall be as nearly uniform as practicable. So it's in our Wisconsin Constitution that we provide to students an equal education for all students. And when you start sending kids off to voucher schools, especially private voucher schools, there's no way to regulate that because they function as businesses. They're not held to the same standards of accountability as public schools are. And also, I just personally, the idea of voucher schools are based off the idea that education should be a free market system, which is something that I really disagree with. It says that in order to get the best education possible, we need to make competition between schools. But what happens when those schools fail? You know, those students are left behind. Charter schools, private charter schools specifically, and private schools for that matter, can shut down at any time. And what happens to those students then? So, although I know that there are success stories, there are just as many, if not more, stories where charter schools that are run as businesses that are receiving these vouchers fail. And so taxpayers spend all this money trying to get these schools up and going, and then they don't work, And then the kids go back to public school, which now has less money than they did to start with, and the problem gets worse and worse.
You mentioned the WKCE scores being lower, and why do you think the academic achievement stays the same between voucher schools and public schools?
So moving students from a public school to a private school doesn't necessarily mean that they're all of a sudden going to get smarter. You need a system that encourages students to want to be engaged and to learn more. And that's not something that can just happen when you send them to a quote unquote better school. I think that there's not a lot of regulation among these voucher schools, again, to make sure that they're being held to the same accountability standards as public schools. And there's no, I don't know, I think to me, there's this idea that because we're going to take these students out of the old schools and put them into the new schools, and then everything's going to be better. But that's just not what's happening. These schools aren't some magical, like, cure-all. I think in order to raise student achievement, it starts with the teachers, and there's not like a, I don't know, I don't think there's a huge difference in the actual type and level of education provided, except at these private voucher schools, it's less regulated. So you're not assured that you'll keep having that same standard of achievement.
So you've touched a little bit on it, but there you mentioned the social issues, and if a student is in a neighborhood where friends around them don't get the voucher and go to public school, how does that affect their relationship?
Well, this isn't something I have personal experience in, so I don't know if I could speak on that. But I think that, that student gets ostracized a bit if they go off to like the good school, and their friends are all left at the public school that that one kid's parents think isn't good enough for their kid. So I think in that situation it could create some strife between the friends. I think if I was a parent of that neighborhood, right? And one of the families in the neighborhood decided that their student was better than that school.
Yeah.
I would get a little frustrated, because don't you think that it would be more effective to band together and help fix the public school that's already in the neighborhood so that all of our kids could get a better education,
Yeah.
instead of picking students away to send them, I don't know, to send them all across town and to systems that aren't even proven to be better.
Yeah. All right. Do you have any last thoughts you want to say?
I would say that in the time that we're at now in our country and in our state, well, Milwaukee specifically, because it's the most segregated city for students in the entire country, this isn't the time when we should be allowing parents to send their kids anywhere, instead of ensuring that we are fighting together for a public school system that serves all students at the same level and meets them at their level and provides services for students with disabilities and doesn't continue socially segregating students. I mean, if you're sending students off to all of these different private schools, there's no real equal education for students across the state. And that's something that I have a really big issue with.
All right.